Playas, how you doing? Welcome back to Playas Guide. I've noticed that there are some Nintendo games, Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, games that have really shot up in value over the past years. Have you noticed that? Well, I'm here to tell you about a few games today that may have gone up in value, but not to the extent that a lot of the other rarer or popular games have that are a part of the library. So I got 10 of them and some other notable mentions. So stick around for that. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys the top 10 here. I'm going to run them down from number 10 to number 1. And then I'm going to give you guys the notable mentions, because if you're really into collecting or getting started collecting for the NES, you're going to want to know about those games because now is a good time, I think, to pick them up because there's not much hype around them. And the value, these games are undervalued. They should be worth a lot more than some of the other games that like your Kickmasters and Power Blade, and even some of the more rare games like Dragon Fighter that have, and Swordmaster. There's another one. They've jumped up in value so much. Are they worth that? I mean, I'll let you decide. But I got some other games that are even harder to find subjectively in terms of where they are at in value. They just haven't seen probably the increase they should have in terms of rarity. And a lot of the reason for this is, well, these games aren't as fun as those other games I mentioned. That's one of the reasons those games have gone up in values, because they're more sought after by retro collectors and gamers. These games kind of went under the radar, and I think they're undervalued. That doesn't mean they're more rare or they should be in the top 10 rarest games of all time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they should be worth more than they are. So if you don't have these games, it might be worth considering picking them up. So number 10 on the list, I have Race America. So this game I really think is undervalued a lot. I can't remember how I got my copy, but I want to say I bought it online years ago. And I don't know if I've ever seen it out in the wild, except for at conventions. And it, the price wasn't the best there either. But just going to flea markets, game stores, or, your local Craigslist or Kijiji ads, I've never seen it. I could tell you that for sure. And this game's around $50, maybe a little bit more than that, which I don't think is a fair value. I think it should be almost double that, and that's the reason why, because I never see this game. It is a hidden rare, and I'm not saying it's a great fun game to play. If you're looking to spend a lot of money on a game that's fun to play, you're probably better off going with the Dragon Fighter or something along those lines. But definitely in terms of value and rarity, it is undervalued. Next undervalued game is Pirates. Another one that I'm not sure if or how many times I've ever come across this game in the wild. I know I've seen it at conventions and swap meets, but I've seen everything at these shows at this point now. So, there's nothing off the table in those, if you're counting that as going out and game hunting in the wild. But yeah, Pirates, you don't see this one too often, and it goes for around $25. It's pretty cheap. Now, I'm not going to say this is another game that may not be so great or may not appeal to a lot of people, but is definitely undervalued. And another game that is good, here's one that is good and that I would highly recommend picking up for $40 to $50. That's about what it goes for in 2020. This is 2020 prices we're talking here, folks. North and South. This is a great turn-based strategy game. Now, I'm not big on a lot of these strategy games, especially since many of them are rare and somewhat undervalued, but this is a great one. I enjoyed playing this game thoroughly, especially if you have a friend to play with. It's a great game. You should just go pick it up and add it to your collection anyways, because if you could get it at that price point or cheaper, it is worth having. And it is one that I see from time to time, but it's a pretty uncommon game. You don't see this one all that often. So I really think it's underappreciated and undervalued. Next up is a favorite of mine, and that is Pac-Mania. I love this game. I think this is a great game. If you like Pac-Man or any of those arcade-style games, this is a really good one that is on the NES, and you should have it. And it's cheap. You could probably get it for $20 or less. I'm going to say like 10 to 15 bucks would be the going rate in 2020 for Pac-Mania. And maybe I'm saying the names of some of these games like Pac-Mania and you never heard of it. Well, if you never heard of it, that's because it's not that common. It's not a rare game. You know, like these games I'm talking about here are not meant to be the top tier rarest games. I'm talking about games that are either undervalued or underappreciated that you could pick up in 2020. I can't say that they're going to go up in value in the future, but they might. So now's a great time to buy them. Fire and Ice. This game is amazing. This is the follow-up to Solomon's Key. This is Solomon's Key 2. In North America, it was called Fire and Ice, which maybe threw some people off. It has some boring cover art of like some ice cubes and fire. This is an amazing puzzle game. It is a lot of fun, and it increasingly gets difficult and pretty intense towards the end of the game. I've never been able to beat it, but I have put some time into this one and do enjoy picking up and playing it from time to time. I've been lucky and fortunate enough to find this one early on for pretty cheap as it was. But this was one that almost touched, I would say, the top 10 of the rarest licensed games. It's up there. It's a top tier game in terms of rarity. But people don't talk about it. Like I said, people are talking about Swordmaster and Kickmaster, stuff like that. They're not talking about Fire and Ice. I don't know why this game gets overlooked, because it's not a platformer. But when I started collecting, this was a pretty rare game, and I think it still is. You're going to pay between $100 and $200, but $200 is a bit of a stretch. I don't think it's ever reached quite that high of a price at any time. So I would recommend picking that one up because it's a lot of fun to play, and it is extremely undervalued. Like, in comparison to some of these other games, this game should be worth double what it is. Easily. King's Quest V. I think this game's around 25 bucks. I'm not going to say this is a fun game to play. It's not one that I enjoy, so I can't recommend the gameplay to you. But the frequency in which I see King's Quest V, I have seen it in the wild before, but it's, I've been collecting for like 20 years. I hardly ever see this game. And the fact that it's around 25 bucks, I want to say, in 2020 is, it doesn't make sense. I think it's one of those games that, as people, if they're going for a complete NES, they're looking at this game maybe towards the end of their collecting lifespan for this console, and this might be one that you're looking for, and people just don't pick it up early enough, or they drop off or whatever. But it is a pretty hard game to come by, and at $25, I would say it's undervalued. Next up is one that is definitely rare and has over the years become undervalued, and this is partially because Caltron 6-in-1, that's the game I'm talking about. There was, I believe it was like a skid of them, of brand new copies found, or a couple boxes, something along those lines, found down in Mexico. But this was many years ago now. That supply has long since dried up, and this is a hard game to find again. And the value never completely bottomed out. It did take a bit of a nosedive for a while there, but then it started climbing back up and up because there still are only so many copies to go around. It's the same as when Tim Atwood released those photos of his sealed boxes of Stadium Events. We didn't see that game take a nosedive, and people don't think of it as worthless anymore. Now with Caltron, it's not Stadium Events, and there were several copies found of this game, so it did affect the price. But in 2020, this game is around $250, and it's another one that I think should probably be worth double what it is. But a lot of what this is collectors coming in. They're not looking at the unlicensed stuff. And because a lot of the unlicensed stuff right now is somewhat undervalued. You can get a lot of that stuff pretty cheap. They're going for the licensed set, and these higher priced or harder to find rare unlicensed games, they're not picking up for that reason. Plus, you're not going to have a blast with this game. You might have a laugh with it. It's not the worst unlicensed game that you could buy, but a lot of these other more valuable NES games are better. Miracle Piano. This game, I think you can find the Miracle Piano easier than you can find Miracle Piano on the NES. This is very undervalued. It's about $15 for a copy of this game. You might even be able to find it cheaper because, it's a game meant to teach people piano on the NES. People don't really want to be buying this, but in terms of how rare it actually is, it's very hard to come by. It is, I don't want to say extremely uncommon, but it's really uncommon. It's a pretty tough game to acquire if you're just going around to game stores or flea markets or wherever. Online, obviously, you can buy any of these games any time of day. But yeah, this is another one that's undervalued. Not so much underappreciated, though. I got two more for you. So next up, Racer Mate Challenge. Racer Mate Challenge goes for maybe $150. But when do you ever see this game? This is one that isn't always available even online if you're looking on eBay. So why is it not worth more? And the answer is because you got to have a bike to set up this thing to actually play it. Otherwise, you're just collecting. And even then, people don't necessarily have the space to set up a bike to play a bike racing game on their NES that isn't even that great. But it's really rare, and it's weird looking. I mean, I like this stuff. I'm really into these kind of oddball games, especially since there's so many of them for the NES, which I think makes it such a cool console to collect for. But if you're a collector and you don't have this one, if you're a serious NES collector, for $150, it's a really rare game, and it just the value of it doesn't reflect how rare it actually is. All right, so we've made it to the number one on the list, and then I'm just going to fire off some kind of other ones that, maybe you might think or didn't think of that are undervalued and underrated. So the number one is Maxi 15. What the heck happened here? What is this game going for now? Like $50, maybe around there. It was going for around $50 over 10 years ago, and it's not risen in price. And when you see this game, which you will see it from time to time, usually at conventions and swap meets, it's in terrible condition, and if you get a complete one with that shell case that it came in, I mean, this has 15 games on it. They're not all the best games, but they're not bad games. They're the American video games, and they're all right. But in terms of the value of this game, its rarity, it really is a steal at that price. It should be worth a lot more because it is much more rare than some of the games that have gone up in price. Like, I know Swamp Thing has gone up in price. And a couple of years ago, I would have said that was an underrated and undervalued game. But it's gone up. Why this one hasn't gone up? Because I don't know. Like I said, it's a lot of collectors looking for that licensed set, and looking for, like, Swamp Thing maybe you've heard of Swamp Thing before. You know, there's a movie and a cartoon show. It's a toy line that the game was based on. But for Maxi 15, you know, like the name just sounds weird altogether. Okay, so here are some games that I think are also undervalued, but they're not going to make my top 10. Let me know what you think, because I'm sure you guys have a few that you think are undervalued or underappreciated as well. So I'm just going to read these off and not give you the value of them in 2020. But, you know, they're definitely not the easiest to come by. You don't see them every day. And they're not the most expensive games. So to start things off, there's Power Punch, which was going to be the follow-up to Punch-Out. It's Intergalactic Power Punch. And they kind of used a character on the cover of this that looked a bit like Mike Tyson, but it's not. They make it clear that this is not Mike Tyson, and he's in outer space boxing. Xanac. Xanac is pretty cheap, and it's a shooter I don't see very often. You know, there's quite a few shooters that are very common, and this one is not so common. Another game is Totally Rad. So maybe you've heard of this one, but it's a really good game, and it is quite uncommon. It just hasn't gone up in value at all. Another one that I would put in that same boat is Kabuki Quantum Fighter. You see this one a little bit more, I would say, than Totally Rad. It's a little bit more common. Like, these aren't rare games I'm talking about, but they are undervalued in terms of price. So if you don't have them in your collection, definitely go out and pick those up. Worth having and worth the price that they're at in 2020. Fisher-Price Firehouse Rescue. Well, we know why this one isn't going up in value. It's because it's a baby game, and, you know, but it is uncommon. It's an uncommon one that, you know, you might find down the road if you're collecting. Hard to pick up. Daydreaming Davy is another one that I do see from time to time, but it's really not that common, and it is still pretty cheap. Little Ninja Brothers. Now, this one has some value, but this one is uncommon. This one you do not see very often, and this is a really good game. This is a fun game. It follows up based off of the game Kung Fu Heroes, and great game. Not too expensive, but it is definitely very undervalued in terms of, you know, just how good it is and how rare it is. Galaxy 5000, I do see this game time to time, but it's definitely an uncommon game that doesn't have a very big price tag on it like many other uncommon games on the NES. Terminator. This one is, you know, this one's very underrated. You do not come across it that often. Terminator 2 is a pretty common game, but the first Terminator game, I don't see all that much. And it isn't all that expensive. Now, I'm not going to say it's a great game, but it's all right. Lone Ranger, that's one I will see from time to time, but it is a very uncommon game, and it's not that expensive. If you're an NES collector or just a video game collector in general, you've come to the right place. This channel is all about retro gaming and video game collecting. I got a lot of other videos like this up here on the channel. I also ran a channel over on Twitch with several other streamers who bring you the highest quality entertainment every week for retro gaming live on Twitch. So please check out Playas Guide on Twitch. We also got Instagram, Twitter, and a podcast. It will mean a lot to us if you gave the channel a subscription. And if you're into, like I said, retro gaming and collecting, you're going to want to do that because we want to make Playas Guide your source for retro gaming and collecting. Until next time, keep it retro. Later, players.